Okay, right. I think it's about 7 o'clock. So evening, everybody. Welcome to the I think is the first meeting of this committee in its current iteration. Hence why I'd have noticed there aren't any previous minutes to look at. Bearing in mind the committee was in different form previously, and I'm sure whilst we don't meet very often, tonight we'll be proving that it's quality rather than quantity that counts. Turning to the agenda, apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillors Bailey, Begum, Butler, Healy and Hetherington. Substitute for Councillor Butler is Councillor Maureen Stockwood.
Thank you. And any declarations of interest?
Yes, I would declare interest on item 4 because I have a street trading business.
Okay. So for that item, which happens fortunately to be the last one on the agenda, you'll be leaving the. You get to go home an early bath, as we might say in the football trade. But there we go. So moving swiftly on then, substantive business of the agenda tonight. Item 3, to approve a revised policy for hackney carriages and private hire vehicles. Invite Jeff Carpenter to present at this stage.
Thank you. Good evening, members. First of all, I'd like to introduce my colleagues to my right, who will assist me in as we run through the. You haven't got any slides or anything. I'm just going to run through the main requirements of the policies. So to my right here, I've got Martin Hickey, who's my principal officer covering community safety and licensing, and the gentleman here is Peter Harris, who's the you should know if you've done the training. As our senior licensing officer, and so he'll have more the technical knowledge around licensing. So in terms of this item, the revised hackney carriages and private hire licensing policy, this is a policy which should have been due for review in 2022, but we've made the decision to revise this early owing to a number of legislative changes. Which we'll come on to, and also we thought there was an opportunity to make some amendments to the policy in light of things like our community challenges around the environment, things like that. So there are some changes in there which I'll run through. So the main changes within the policy, which, like I say, is due for review in 2022, are as follows. The first one is around including some new recommended paragraphs and wording to show justification around data sharing, and also around the legal context to allow taxi drivers to share their data around revocations and surrendering data licenses. So essentially that's about a scenario where if a driver has been refused in one area but applies for a new licence in another, whereas hitherto we wouldn't know anything about it. We would in Nottinghamshire, because actually we do talk to neighbouring councils in Nottinghamshire. But if a driver that was refused in London then wanted to apply for a licence in Rushcliffe, how would we know about that? Well, this process called NR3 is administered by the National Anti-Fraud Network, will allow that to happen. Is that right, Martin? Yeah. So that's that. We've got also paragraphs that demonstrate the changes to discourage or to encourage our taxis to be cleaner. More specifically, there are clean air zones around the country, specifically in Birmingham. Peter, is that right?
Birmingham's our nearest one.
Birmingham's our nearest one. So we are required under statute to provide DEFRA with all of our taxi details, so that if one of our taxis go to Birmingham know that it's one of our taxis and whether it needs to pay the fixed penalty charge or the charging scheme that applies in Birmingham. At the moment it's only Birmingham, but clean air zones may well apply to other cities in the country going forwards. Is that right?
Yeah, Nottingham has turned that one down at the moment. Sorry. Yeah, Nottingham have revised their clean air zone. They say they've met their requirements, so they're now not included in the clean air zone which they were originally going to charge for. So that would have been our nearest. Our next nearest is Birmingham. I think we're down to the South Country. I think some Plymouth that way.
Okay. There were also some general changes to the policy to ensure that we were fully in compliant with GDPR, and we have revised privacy statements around that. And I guess one of the most significant changes that we've made to the policy is around to some technical requirements. Now we've made these, and I'll ask Martin and Peter to run through the main requirements of these, but fundamentally these changes have been designed to improve our taxi fleet and to further protect the public and the environment. So one of the examples that I would give you is that we'll be looking to not accept any new vehicles, and it's new vehicles that are registered before the 1st of January 2011. So that's, as it will be when this policy comes into place in early 2020, that will mean that we would not allow a new taxi that is older than 9 years old. Okay, so by definition we are requiring a newer, thereby cleaner fleet. Yes?
Yeah, Euro 6 engines came in 2011 at that date. Sorry, I'm forgetting this one. Yeah, Euro 6 engines came in for both diesel and petrol, so they're all Euro 6 with the 2011 date. So we decided that at the moment as our base mark, because before we had Euro 5 and Euro 6 as a mix. Euro 5 for diesels, Euro 6 for petrols. So what we're doing is we're just saying to our fleet, we want you to be better than this, we want you to be cleaner, and we're pushing that one.
Other changes include spare wheels, and we're requiring that vehicles must have one if there is one available, if there's a wheel well in the vehicle. If not, they can have a manufacturer's replacement, but the journey can't continue with passengers. They can use alternatives to spare wheels in certain circumstances. We've talked about that, so yeah.
Yeah, that's because manufacturers now don't give you a spare wheel. So you might not have a wheel well, and we were experiencing problems with vehicles that were trying to find a spare wheel, to be quite honest. So we decided the best thing was to go with whatever the manufacturer fits. But we have said to them, if they do a long journey and they get a problem with the tyre, they must make arrangements for the onward journey for the passenger, or they have some form of contract with the National Tyre Company. Because once you've ripped a tyre up on the motorway, no amount of glue you put in is going to put it back together again. So that's the issue.
Okay, other changes around requiring some side signs, the vehicle condition, and also there's some paragraphs in there around it's something that we already do, that we work very closely with other councils in the area, and we actually are, if you like, joint warranted with other councils, so we can check vehicles in Rushcliffe that are Nottingham City vehicles or from elsewhere within the area, and vice versa. So if one of our taxis goes to the city, they can check it on our behalf. And we only do tests at the airports and elsewhere, don't you, Peter?
Yeah, we do. We do tests with North West Leicestershire and other authorities in the airport, and we would now, by the end of this year, have done 2 tests with the city, looking at not just mainly city cabs, but Gedling, ours, and the odd Wolverhampton one we managed to find. But yeah, that picks up and any problems we have. So we're quite happy with that.
So going back to that age aspect, so the age limit, the 9-year limit. So the current requirement is 14 years. Peter, is that right?
14 years for a specialised vehicle, which is the bigger wheelchair ones, which are used for schools, and it's 12 years for a hackney and a private hire.
Okay. So members might want to think about what sort of taxi fleet do we want going forward, and I think we're looking that we'd like to encourage our taxi fleet to move to become more environmentally compliant in light of our strategy around the environment and climate change and whatnot. But some councils, for example the city, are moving indeed next year to alternative fuel vehicles as of next year. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why we want this policy. Is the danger is that when the city do that, their older fleet, dare I say dirtier fleet, could migrate into Rushcliffe. So we need to have this requirement in place so that we can control the standards of taxi fleet within Rushcliffe. That's one of the reasons why we would like to do that. Okay, but that isn't to say that we're fixed on a 9-year limit for taxis. It might be that members feel that you want to be stricter. The reason that we're moving in this, we're doing it in a stepped process. So rather than going all in, like some councils have, and say, right, we want to require no taxi older than 3 years or 4 years, that could have quite damaging consequences to the taxi trade within Rushcliffe. At the moment, we've had little or no feedback on this policy from the taxi trade. So one would say from that they're not overly concerned. But were we to go to something rather more stricter, they would have something to say about it potentially. Okay. Other changes in the policy that are of note, I think we've got a new driver application process in place at the moment. It's something that the team worked very hard at last year. Previously, there was a case where drivers could pay up front for their licence and then be sent on their way to carry out pre-application or to carry out certain checks, which are mandated by law. So things like knowledge tests,
driving, medical, DBS.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So a whole host of checks, and what tended to happen quite frequently was that a driver would, for example, a knowledge test. They have 3 opportunities to do a knowledge test. But if they failed once, they might then leave it for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. All the while, this money, and then give up and go and do something else, and then want their money back. So we put in place a process where you could pay a pre-application fee. I think it's £25, but the driver then cannot actually start the application process until all of those relevant checks, DBS checks, knowledge tests, have all been completed. So we've got all the information up front, and only at that point can they press go and apply for a driver's licence or a taxi driver's licence. And straight away we've seen that's made some really significant changes and improvements to the efficiency of our process. We're no longer getting requests for refunds, which was getting really quite time consuming. We've got other changes in the document around bringing it into line with the Institute of Licensing guidance for offences. We've got some minor changes to operator conditions. We've got documented driver conditions. What's that? The documents to the changes to driver conditions. What's that?
We've just added some more conditions to them too. Yeah, sorry, I forgot that was it. We've just added some more conditions to them to make sure that they're more compliant. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head of one. We felt that we needed to have more control of them. Particularly in their licence, as they start working for other operators, and they wouldn't pick up their licence and carry it over to the next operator. So we're just laying that in. Plus, we've added in some more offences under our points, which has come out under the Institute of Licensing. So whereas we had sort of 20 offences where we gave points, I think we now got about 25, 26. So.
Thanks, Peter. Other changes just of note, minor amendments to driver penalty system. So we have point system on our policy for taxi drivers as well as their driver's licence checks. And they have to subscribe to a DBS notification service. They have to carry out safeguard refresher training. And there's also some changes, some quite significant changes around what's called Section 167. I'll let Martin describe this because he understands it better than I do.
Thank you, Jeff. Section 167 comes under the Equalities Act. It enables the authority to create a list of vehicles whereby, if they're able to be wheelchair accessible, then it creates an offence for the driver not to take that individual disabled person. If we don't have the 167 list, we can deal with it under the policy in terms of points for the driver for refusing a fare, but the Section 167, if they're on the list and they refuse, it creates a criminal offence. So it gives much more greater protection to the disabled person if a driver refuses them.
Thank you. So, and that list is available on our website. Okay. That's a much more greater protection for assistant dog users and disabled users, basically, isn't it? I think that's pretty much the sort of the summary of the changes within the policy. It's quite a large document, as you can see. So you may have not read all of it, but hopefully that's given you an insight into the changes that we brought to you today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So, open it up to the floor with any questions. Yeah, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I was just curious about the alternative fuel that Nottingham City were going to change into, and what I don't know what that is. What alternative fuel are they proposing?
Yeah, Nottingham City, they changed their bus fleet to be more gas efficient, and the taxi fleet, you'll see the electric ones, bit of a squarer vehicle, and they've taken on some Mercedes Vitos, which are more economical, and that's what they're looking at. So they're saying in 2020, that's what you're going to have. But they have a scheme where the ability is to give the driver a bit of a loan to start taking on that car. But there again, there's more and more people in Nottingham to take around, so we couldn't offer that, I'm afraid, in this borough. But yeah, that's what they're doing.
Councillor Stockwood.
Thank you very much. In revising the scheme, the policy for 2019, does that make it a 5-year policy from now, or it's still so it's still to 2022?
Yes.
So by 2022, vehicles will be 11 years old.
Yes, that's right.
So
We'll come back in 2022. The thinking behind that was this whole industry is changing so quickly, and the whole issues around the environment are changing so quickly that we want to come back to members in 2022 with a new policy, which will probably substantially be very similar to this, but it'll be that. So that date at the moment is enshrined within the policy, isn't it? The 1st of January 2011, and like you say, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, those cars are going to be even older. So.
Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Can I just ask, with that date, why is it fixed? You know, you mentioned about the engines and that from when they came in, but why is it not like a date that moves forward? So it's always 9 years.
Really, that's up to you. We picked a date. It was in line with our last bit of the policy, which had a date, and we said this is the most significant date to run from, because then we'll know when we look at the logbook, we will know that's a Euro 6 engine. The logbook doesn't specify sometimes what sort of engine it's got in. So that was our main thinking why we picked that date. But if obviously you feel that date should be amended, we obviously will look at that.
So, Councillor Stockwood, yeah.
just to be clear, then you said the taxi trade have not raised. There's one consultee response. Is that because they're not bothered, or because they weren't engaged effectively? Are we sure that we've reached out to the trade to make sure that they've had an opportunity to comment?
I think the answer is definitely that we have consulted with all relevant stakeholders within this policy. I think did you speak to any taxi drivers? I think you did, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I spoke to the man who says he represents all the taxi drivers. In reality, he represents probably about 10 to 12, and we've got over 40. But he didn't want to entertain or go into anything. He certainly is one that wants his vehicles to be given a longer time on the road, because he hasn't got an idea of business, I have to say. I'll say that quite outright. He can't afford to buy a new vehicle, and that's the top and bottom of it. And these vehicles, when you go sit in them, you'll find out there's just as well, we might as well just sit in a board of wood out there because it's that solid. We want all our residents to have a nice ride, comfortable, and a valued trip. And that's why we're getting vehicles from outside the area coming in, because people don't wish to travel in our vehicles.
Councillor Mander.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to say, even with our current policy and current standards, the taxis in Rushcliffe are pretty ropey. You know, by God, they really are. I mean, you're getting so we've got about 40 licensed, something like that, and a lot of them are going to be doing journeys. I mean, I know some will be going out into the rural areas, but a lot of them are going to be doing journeys in and around West Bridgford and in and out of the city, and it's not a good advert and not a good look for Rushcliffe if we're having older, smoky diesel vehicles going in and out of the city when we've got drivers in the city who are going to be driving electric taxis and ones that are Euro 6 or newer, and a lot of that fleet are newer, and some of the drivers live in my ward and have got the brand new electric ones as well, and they're really good. And I think that we should be moving much more towards what the city is doing. I hear what you're saying about what that one sample out of 40 taxi drivers is saying, but with my day job on, my colleague is doing the project at the city, and it's not easy to get the taxi drivers to agree on anything. It's still less to actually get them all in the same room and agree that they're going to be in the same room for 15 minutes without a shouting match, to be honest. And they're always going to push back and they're always going to moan about it. But if we don't push on the standards of the vehicles, not just the emissions, but what they look like, and what they're like to experience as an ordinary member of the public, I really think we want to be a bit harder on this than we are doing and come for a higher standard of vehicle and get them to turn round to new one anyway. If you imagine you get an average vehicle that's doing the kind of mileage that you get on taxis, and you imagine that as your own private vehicle, 11 years old, that's not good. It's not a good advert for Rushcliffe, and particularly if we're going into the city and we're seeing them push, and I know they're pushing for the cleaner air zone there, but one of the reasons that they've not had to go for a paid-for zone is because the city has already committed to push forward its standards and to introduce newer taxis. And I think we should be going the same way.
Do you want to come back, Ocean?
I agree with you. I'm not going to argue about that. It would be nice. The only problem is we haven't got the infrastructure for electric vehicles. That's probably one of our biggest issues. The next thing, obviously, is vehicle conditions. I've tightened up at the testing stations, so the exterior vehicles, if they have any significant damage, that's it, they're not passed. And we've seen an upturn in the number of vehicles refused and having to go away and get bodywork done. But the interior, it's very much down to whether your posterior is cushioned or not. So I get various bits and pieces across the three garages. So with having three garages, trying to get a standard, and I try and make it out, it's difficulty. But I do agree with you. I would like to move it up, but our difficulty is we would have no hackneys at all. If the licensing board wish that, then that's where we go.
Councillor Stopwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, as I'm keen to have at least an annual meeting for this committee, I think it'd be great. I'd like to move the recommendation because I think that's what we've consulted on, and we've been through that process and people have expressed a view. However, I would like to add to the recommendation or amend the recommendation in council terms to say I think we need to be moving towards coming back within the year to say how this is going. I think what we've done here tonight is recognise that our 2017 to 22 policy needed some element of change during that plan period, and we've taken action, and that's good. But I think the situation will change as the city makes progress, and I think there's going to be wider national changes as well that are going to be quite significant in vehicles. So I would like to see it come back within 12 months alongside a plan for moving towards much cleaner vehicles and more modern vehicles. I accept that this is what's gone out to consultation and what's happened now, and this is a step up on what we've got from the 2017 to 22 policy. I think this should go forward to council, but I think we should be looking at coming back in a year's time around looking at the way forward to make our vehicles cleaner and more environmentally friendly. So I'd like to move the recommendation with those 2 extra points in, a review and to understand the situation in 12 months' time, and to have a direction of travel for this policy, which shows how we will be able to move our taxi fleet towards a cleaner and more environmental scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, there's been various comments about the age or the maximum age of the vehicles. Would anybody like to add any comments about that? So an option here is that we move forward with that recommendation. Would anybody like to move anything around amendments to the proposed maximum age of the vehicles?
Chair, I think it's quite difficult just to drop that on, because none of us are experts in this particular field, notwithstanding that we may know people or not, and for us to come forward with that proposal from the floor, I think is wrong. I think that's the sort of thing that we should maybe have had some options brought before us this evening to look at. We're not the experts here, and I totally agree with what Councillor Stockwood is saying. However, I won't be supporting this recommendation. It is we should have had some more stringent options, I think, before us this evening. And I think that a year to turn that round is probably a bit long, in my opinion. And I think we can do better than this. And I think we can do better for our residents.
Okay, so Councillor Stockwood's moved the recommendation with the two points. So unless anyone else got anything to add at this stage, ask people for those who are in favour of that recommendation. Okay, and those against. So that recommendation will go forward. Do you want to say anything about that? At that stage. Okay. Thank you. So moving on to item 4 then. Councillor Walker will be leaving us at this stage. Evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Right, Jeff, do you want to kick off in relation to the street trading policy?
Okay, so yes, this report seeks the approval of the committee of a new street trading policy across the borough. So we don't have a street trading policy currently. What we do have is the ability to control street trading on what's termed consented streets. They exist along Trent Bridge, near the football ground, and on the major A roads. We are unable to control street trading anywhere else within the borough. So the purpose of this policy is twofold. So on the one hand, it enables us to control street trading across the borough, wherever it may take place. It enables us to raise the standards of our street traders so that the standards are actually improved. Examples I would give would be around having a fit and proper person test, to control the ability of trade waste, to control the use of single-use plastics, safeguarding issues, and also food hygiene. So generally speaking, we are able to control street trading across the entire borough and increase the standards therein. We have done quite we've done a very broad consultation, again, had a number of comments back, internally and externally. So one of the major changes that we made was that initially this applied to markets, like Bingham Market, for example. But as a result of those consultations, we accept that it could theoretically impact on those traders on the market. So any market held by or organised through the council is exempted from the street trading policy according to this policy. So yeah, that's pretty much all I need to say on it. I think unless Martin or Pete have anything else more to add.
Having street trading enables protection from nuisance that might be caused by street trading as well. And any application through the street trading enables considerations to be made for any consultation that takes place, which could include councillors or any other person that lives near an area. So currently we don't have that protection outside the consent areas at the moment.
Thank you very much. So, open it to councillors for comment or query. Councillor Adair.
A lot of current street traders around the borough. How will this developed policy affect those current street traders that we know of around the borough at the moment? Are any of them really affected? Because it is their livelihoods, and we should be ensuring that, you know, we're not taking their livelihood away with them just at the stroke of a pen. So how are they affected? I mean, I know around my area there's a lot of, you know, where you see them areas where truck drivers will pull in and then somebody's there to help them out with a cup of tea and a bun or whatever they have. And I was just wondering, I mean, they are people's livelihoods, so it's just not a question of putting a pen through somebody's livelihood. We need to have a controlled way of managing that out, if that's what we intend to do.
Yeah, we've you probably find they're on A roads, and those we can control. And we do, when you go up to the van, there should be a little blue plaque in it with a number. So we've got control of them at the moment. What we're trying to do with them is, first off, our single-use plastics policy. We're trying to extend that and make that better, so that any rubbish that blows around is biodegradable. We also want them to take responsibility for their rubbish. We want them to take responsibility of where do they go to the toilet. We want them to take responsibility for everything there to do with food, the handling of food, etc. Those that aren't licensed with us, they will be licensed, and we can then bring the standards up. We're stopping them from stopping outside the school and offering their burgers at dinner time. That's something we can do in here. We can stop them going to other places where it might affect children or other vulnerable people. So it's quite wide standing. I think we put churches down. As I say, in schools is the main thing. We are certainly affected by ice cream vans and hot dogs and all this business around schools at set times. And they sometimes park on the yellow lines. And we know we haven't really got any enforcement of them, but through this way, we can control where they stop. We can control what they do. We're not stopping them making a livelihood. And remember that food, there is a high markup on food. If you went to Wetherspoons, their markup is 85%. So if you're telling me you're going to buy half a dozen sausages and stick it in a bun and you're not making money out of it, then I have an issue with that one. But that's where we are with that. Okay. Sorry? Yeah.
We have consulted with our food hygiene colleagues in environmental health. Their recommendation is to have a minimum star rating of 3 under the food hygiene rating system for them, which is not the highest standard, but their view is that they do struggle sometimes in order to meet the minimum standards for food hygiene in some of the street traders, and having this within the policy will give them a good leverage into ensure that those people that utilise street traders don't suffer poor food hygiene. So having a minimum 3 is something that they feel is acceptable and drivable, and trying to work with them initially to try and get them up to a 3 if they fail would be the direction moving forward. But ultimately, if a food vendor significantly falls below the food hygiene rating, this policy will enable us to be able to say you're not reaching a standard adequate enough to be a food vendor within the district. But the 3-star rating has come from guidance from our food EHO colleagues.
Councillor Stockworth.
Thank you. Food hygiene certificates, do you accept the ones that you can get online? And they only last for 3 years, and is there a method of controlling that?
Every
inspected.
every food vendor has to be registered as a food business with an authority. Sometimes that's with ourselves, sometimes that's with a neighbouring authority, and it's inspected according to the national strategy for food inspections. So the training certificate forms part of that inspection strategy. It's just one element. Whether or not it's acceptable to have an online one or other, you'd really need to ask a food officer as to the quality of any certificate that was put forward to show that they were capable of being a food handler, which I think is what you're referring to.
Councillor Stockwell, thank you.
Excellent. I'd like to know, I mean, you talked about it's as though it's a lot about people selling food from trailers or that sort of thing. I'm not quite sure I understand the peddler aspect. Is somebody coming door to door selling tea cloths a peddler? No. So,
Yes, he is.
He is a peddler.
He is a peddler. Yeah.
He's a peddler.
Yeah.
But then it comes down to enforcement, I think, of what can we actually do as enforcement, because the things that I see in Bingham are people going door to door. They're not licensed in any way. They're trying to sell some form of good, perhaps, or some artwork that they've created or something along those lines. And it talks about enforcement, but is there a process within our policy establishing how a member of the public requests enforcement? I mean, who do we call when we see an unlicensed peddler?
Actually, it's the police.
It's the police.
It's the police. They have the power.
Excellent.
We don't have the power to arrest them. They have the power to arrest them. That goes back way in time. We certainly see an increase of peddlers around the sports grounds, and we vigorously chase them. In our policy, we've put about peddlers. If they stop still for longer than 20 minutes, they become a street trader. And the 20 minutes is not something I've plucked out of the hat. It's due to case law. But they know that they must keep moving. They know that if they're selling their wares, that they have to be stopped by a resident to purchase it. It shouldn't just rock up somewhere and stand still. When you're talking about the door-to-doors that are out in the community, they don't come under us in any way, shape or form. They are definitely the police. But we certainly, I license door-to-door in the fact of the Red Cross, etc. and others. And if they should fall foul, yes, we'll come on to them. But selling dusters and the rest of the things, I'm afraid I can't do a great deal about that one.
And two other points I'd like to raise is about understanding where the extent of a consent street is. And firstly, you've added in a section about single-use plastics for the street traders. Perhaps is there also people selling balloons who are come and appear at our events? And I think their balloons might be helium filled, or well, I don't know for sure. Is there any way that the single-use plastics could be joined? Also mentioned the sale of the helium products and the sky lanterns, which are other prohibited products.
I'd love to say there is, but it's only on Rushcliffe land that we probably could enforce that, but not very well. The issue for us, obviously, is are the balloons appropriate? They'll have to have a CE mark, and there is some. It's all really a trading standards issue about what they're selling, whether the goods are up to quality. But yet again, they're classed as a peddler.
Right. So my final point then is understanding about consent streets, or where places. Some of the streets are green. So if the street is you're allowed to trade, does that what about courtyards in front of properties that face onto that street? I mean, are you talking just you quite specific definition of a street, and then you say that the private land nearby may also be the street. So is the private land? So there's courtyards along some of the consent streets that might be you could trade goods from, perhaps.
Possibly, but the issue really is when we talk about that private land. So long as the public have access without payment, whoever's trading on that land, then we can enforce street trading. That is in law, so we've got no problem with that. If they pay a fee, even if it be a nominal of 1 pence or whatever, to gain access to that land, they are private and we can't touch them. But we did with the cricket match where one trader rocked up on the car park, which used to be the car sales. We removed him because he was trying to say, I'm on private land. No, thank you very much. See you, goodbye. You're not allowed here. But you talk about consent streets. We are looking at removing these people from residential areas and from probably some of the smaller shopping arcade areas. They've got to tell us where they're going. They've got to produce a map. They've got to give us the details of their vehicle or trailer. So it is that control we're looking at, and stopping nasty smells being smelled by Mrs. So-and-so around the corner, etc.
Can I just make an additional comment to that? We would have to go for a resolution to extend the consent streets to the entire district. So currently the maps that are present show prohibited streets and currently consented streets, but following successful resolution of the adoption of the consent streets throughout the district, every street would be a consent street, apart from those that are prohibited streets.
Yeah, thank you. That doesn't have any impact. I'm just thinking about, when communities have, events and fairs and stuff, that people just private citizens put stalls out on the streets, just selling bits and pieces. That isn't something that we want to have an impact on. So this won't have any impact on this, will it?
There's various exemptions in the policy that would cover community events.
And the other thing was that we talked about smells, but also there's the noise aspect. The limit on noise, because some of the when you get quite a few places together and you get the diesel generators running, they can make quite a racket.
The aim of the policy would be to control all nuisance impacts, which would include noise.
I have a question. The report refers to the fact, I think you've got quite a clear idea already about who the operators are who will be covered. What will be the process around? Will the council be contacting them to let them know they ought to be applying, or will you be waiting for them to know that the policies come in and therefore they need to apply? How will that process work?
We actually do it from July to July, so that we've got a set year. So they would be notified if this was accepted by council in March. We then have to advertise it in the local Nottingham Post to say we're going to do that. Then I think there's a 28-day period after that. So we're running quite close up to July. So what we would say to these people, from this date, this is what we expect. So it's gone out to all of those. We haven't had any comment from any of our food traders in that respect.
I think if we are aware of any particular traders that would fall under the policy, we would make efforts to contact them and make them aware of the policy.
Councillor Williams.
I just going on Councillor Mallinder's point about community events. The section in the document has about one-off and community-based events. What type of time period are you looking at? Because like that, I'm thinking about in Bing we have like a town summer fair in the summer and then a winter one. That's 2 in a year that you could class on one-off events with traders. Would that be exempt, or how picky are you?
Peter will correct me.
That's what I'm just wondering. And then it's like if there's any other such ones, because there's a sentence in it as a letter of intent confirmation would is that saying that it's just a one-off, or that it's not it's community based?
I think there's a degree of discretion to the licensing officer, isn't there, Peter?
Yes, we talk about frequency. If it was every month, then we'd be looking at it.
Right.
And we'd probably talk to the people who had a block consent. So we would not charge them a full fee. We've yet to set that fee, but it would be a reduced fee because of where they are. But the community events is, I do one at Christmas, I do one during the summer, don't bother me.
Anything else? Councillor Stockwood?
I move the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And so, all in favour? Got that? That's everybody. appears listed on the agenda, is it? But, so that concludes the business of the committee meeting tonight. Thank you very much for your attendance, and particularly to Jeff, Martin and Peter for all the, no doubt, hours of hard expert work that's gone into the formulation of the policy. So on behalf of the committee, we thank you very much for your efforts in relation to that. And good evening, everyone.